Freddie Katz here, Mr. Rock and Roll. He's a busy guy, and nice to have you on. My second to last video of the year, and I'm glad you made it, Freddie. Thanks for
Pleasure to
coming
be
on.
here. Thanks for having me.
So let's hear more about your story, about how you got interested in playing rock and roll and guitar and the whole deal.
I was a nerdy kid who was bad at sports, basically.
There you go.
Joey Ramone became a role model.
Okay.
Um, I was in the Elm Jack Little League, and Johnny Thunders was in that also.
Oh,
We
I
grew up
see.
in the same neighborhood, so
Oh, really?
we all knew about Thunders before we even knew about Keith Richards.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, well, he was from Jackson High. I was from Elmhurst, right next to Jackson Heights.
Oh,
So.
wow. And did you know he was that good when he was young?
I knew that he had a crazy reputation. He was sort of a hero slash anti-hero. I
Yeah,
remember the first time I saw him, some people took me to Max's and they were sort of like, let's see if he can make it through the set tonight, you know.
right.
Um, so I was indoctrinated. Um, but I think I was always the kid in the band that wound up mixing the demo.
Okay.
That's the thing. I didn't go to school for engineering or anything like that. I was always just able to figure it out,
Oh, that's good.
you know. Like I remember in high school, my first little cover band that I had, they would give me the records and they would say, figure out these songs. And I could always figure them out. And then later I was sort of the guy that would sit next to the engineer and say, pan this left, pan this right, put some
Right.
reverb here. And eventually I just kind of gleaned it. I learned how to do it myself, and then it just became, it became a thing to do. Like, uh, I never had to, I never had to change my appearance for a job or anything. I was very fortunate that way. If I wasn't making money playing guitar, like, on a tour or something, I could engineer.
Mm.
So
Now,
it's been very useful.
did you do a lot of engineering and on tours with bands, or were you
I
playing?
I have done. Um, that's how I actually that's how I met the dictators. That's how I,
Okay.
in a little roundabout way, that's kind of how I wound up as part of that Shakin' Street tour.
Okay.
Because I knew Andy from the Dictators, and they were going out on a little Midwestern tour. This is around '99 or so, and so they brought me along to do their sound.
Hmm.
And that's when I got to know all the other guys and the Dictators, JP the drummer, Scott Kempner, Ross the
Hmm.
boss, etc. Um, and then later, when I was playing with Patti Rothberg, she needed a drummer, and the Dictators were kind of on hiatus at that point. So
Right.
JP wound up playing with us, and he did a couple of records with us, and he did
Hmm.
a couple of tours with us. So we had this Dictators connection.
Okay.
And I noticed one day that Fabian Shine had a Facebook page. Fabian
Uh,
Shine is the lead singer of Shakin'
yeah.
Street.
Okay.
And I was always a fan. I think that the guitar stuff that Ross does on that Shakin' Street album is some of his best stuff ever.
Hmm.
Um, so I wrote to her and I said, I know the Dictators guys. You played with Ross.
Yeah.
Um, I'm introducing myself.
Yeah.
And she said, why don't you send me some stuff to listen to? So I sent her a few of the Patti Rothberg tracks, and she wrote back and said, your stuff sounds great. Here's my number in LA. The next time you're in LA, ring me up. So I was in LA a few months later, and I drove over to her house with an acoustic guitar, and I played her a few ideas, and we wound up doing this album. together,
Mm.
her solo album, Don't Tell Me How to Shake It.
Right.
And it got a lot of attention in France, and they wanted her to tour with it. And basically, the promoters were sort of like, if you call it Fabian Shine, you'll sell this many tickets. If you call it Shakin' Street, you'll sell this many tickets.
Yeah.
So she decided to bill it as a Shakin' Street reunion tour, and then
Okay.
she pulled Ross back into it. So
Mm.
that's how I wound up playing with Ross the Boss. And then, of course, they needed a rhythm section. So we brought in JP to be the drummer. And, again, but originally I knew them
Yeah.
through the
Mm.
live sound thing.
Okay.
So,
Well, that's a big plus there. And I listened to one of her songs you sent over. That's really good rock and roll.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
it
it's really tight and the guitars are really good.
sounds like a rock and roll band playing,
It
right?
it
But
does. I
that
love
was
it.
all that was all me.
That is
That was
all
all
you.
done one track at a time
It's great. I mean, you
because she and I made the record. There was no band.
okay.
So the way it was done was, you know, laid down an acoustic guide track with a click, then program up some fake drums, put on the bass, put on the guitars, put on the vocals, whatever else. And then once we liked what was there, we went in the studio with JP,
Mm.
got rid of the fake drums and put real drums on it.
Mm.
So in the end product, it sounds like a live rock and roll band
It
playing, but
does.
it was all done. It's a studio creation.
You would never known it. I mean, I would thought it was you guys playing live in a big room.
Yeah, it's got that kind of sound, right?
It does. Now, you Sarah Sound, you guys, you do a lot of recording for bands there, or you do mixing? What?
I do recording, I do mixing, whatever anybody wants to do. I did 4 records for the Carvels here. I
Mm,
did the Donna Destry record here. Yeah, I did the Fabienne record here. I did another album with Patti Rothberg here, which is it's kind of
mm.
languishing here, just waiting for her to decide that she wants to actually do something about it.
Okay.
Patty is kind of in a little bit of a East Village limbo, where
Okay.
she's playing little bars and passing the hat. I'm not sure why she's doing
Mm,
that, but um, it would be great if she wanted to put a real band together again and go out and promote this record. But
yeah.
in the meantime, it's just sitting here.
Well, it's not easy to tour nowadays, especially if you're going over to Europe with all these flight delays now, and
Yeah.
not easy time.
Well, nothing's easy.
No.
It's if you think it's worth doing something, then you try to figure out a way to do it.
Right.
I mean, none of these things are easy. I was a
No.
smart kid. I went to Stuyvesant High School, right? I could have gone to college and become a lawyer or become an accountant, and I could have taken the road more traveled instead of the road less traveled. But
Well, but this is your passion, you love doing it.
yeah,
So you
so
can't do something you don't love doing, and then people get stuck in that routine, and
but
then,
but
you
people
know,
do it all the time.
but you have something that people remember because if they find these records and listen to it, your name's on it, you're playing on it.
Yeah.
So you leave behind, more of yourself in the future doing this kind of thing. But the road's never easy in rock and roll.
No, it's not easy,
So
but
what kind of bands do you see come through besides the ones you mentioned, mostly rock and roll groups?
come through here.
Yeah, your studio.
Everything is by word of mouth, right? It's like, nobody's really looking at any ads or
Yeah.
everybody who's ever worked with me has been, like Andy Chernoff recommended the Carvels to me. So generally it's people in that rock and roll
Right.
milieu, that rock and roll scene.
Okay.
Um, occasionally there's been, like somebody was doing a Broadway play and they needed a karaoke version of a Pat Benatar song. It was this play about child abuse was a
Right.
theme in the play. So they wanted me to record a version of Hell is for Children
Hmm.
without the vocals so they could have their person do the vocals for the
Okay.
play. So, that was like a little weird thing that came through here, but it was still a rock thing.
Right, right.
And I just, I listened to the Pat Benatar record. I figured it all out. I recreated it.
Talk about a little bit the Sopranos, Michael there, Sopa. What about that record?
Michael, okay, so that was sort of funny. I had never seen The Sopranos at the time. I saw the posters for it on the subway. I knew there was this gangster show called The Sopranos. I didn't know anything about it. But when I was touring with Patti Rothberg, we used to rehearse at this. Sadly, it's gone now. So many things are gone, right? But there was a studio up on 56th and 11th Ave called Montana Rehearsal Studio. You remember
Okay.
that place?
Might have a little bit, not much.
Really great rehearsal room. A lot of big acts rehearsed. The Black Crowes rehearsed there. Dylan rehearsed there for years.
Okay.
What was cool about Montana was they had the big soundstage room, right, where Madonna would be rehearsing, or
Wow.
some really big act would be rehearsing, but they also had the smaller room where some local bands would be rehearsing. So you'd come out of your room and there would be Dylan sitting in the lounge, or
Oh, that's funny.
you were like right there with
That's
them,
great.
you know. So one day the manager comes to me and he says, you know that show, The Sopranos? And like, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Like, well, there's this guy on the show, Michael Imperioli, and he's got a little punk band, and he
Yeah.
rehearses here,
Right.
and he needs a guitar tech. You want
Oh,
to
that's
you want
funny.
a guitar tech for him? And I was like, sure, I can guitar tech. Why not? It's money, and
Right.
um, so he had this show at Don Hills, his sort of coming out show with the band.
Right.
He actually had Dick Cavett introduce him.
Dick Cavett.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
hysterical.
Dick Cavett introduced. Yeah, I'm here to introduce the band, kind of thing. And so I was guitar teching for him, and the house guy was doing the sound, and half the time they're not that great. And I said, Michael, I can, you only have a couple of guitars. It's not a big guitar teching job. I could do your sound and take care of your guitars.
Hmm.
So then he said, yeah, okay. So I started mixing his shows. I started doing his
Okay.
sound for his live gigs. And they still didn't have anything recorded. And then his wife, Victoria, used to, and she, I don't know if you know about them. She's a set designer, and
Oh, really? Okay.
yeah, they're this like sort of theater power couple. They
Hmm.
had that Studio Dante. They had that little theater on
Oh,
29th
okay.
Street for a
Right.
while, and they're involved in all kinds of independent theater things,
Hmm.
and so she's always there. She's like his other half, and she would hang around behind the mixing board
Oh, really? That's funny.
and she would say, Freddie, these guys, they never recorded anything. You got to take them in the studio. They need guidance. You
There you
can give
go.
them guidance. And I said, I'm not gonna. I don't want to push myself. You can't do that. I said, listen, he has to. If he comes to me and asks me to produce something, I'll produce something.
Right.
I don't want to badger him. She was like,
No.
no, you got to go tell him. You got to go. And she kept like pushing me about it. And I didn't want to do that. I don't think that's the way to do it.
Right.
Eventually, one day he rings me up on the phone. He says, listen, I think we should record these songs. Why don't you take us in the studio?
Wow. Wow. That's
So
funny.
then I recorded those 3 songs that became that Tondo EP.
Hmm.
I produced those three songs for them.
Now
And
what year was this? I didn't never ask you that.
well, the record originally they were like demos for him, you know. He
Okay.
used a couple of them. He used a couple of them. He had an independent film that he directed called The Hungry Ghosts. He used some of it in soundtrack for
All
that.
right.
Um, what happened was we did that, and then The Sopranos ended shortly thereafter, and then he was hanging around New York, and nothing much was happening. So he moved to L.A.
Hmm.
Um, he moved to Santa Barbara, and he did a few episodes of Lucifer, and he did Californication for a little bit. So he was out there for about 10 years. So while he was out there, the band went on hiatus.
Okay.
And then eventually he got sick of LA and he came back. He came back to New York a few years ago and he reconnected with his bandmates and they started it up again.
Hmm.
And then they decided, you know, we should release these tracks as an EP.
All right.
So they actually just came out recently, even though they were done in 2008 originally. But they just came out last year, you know, or
Man.
like 2 years ago, I guess
Okay.
now. And you know, and yeah, now he's doing that as a full time thing. You know, he did another record. You know, of course, he's very connected, Michael. So
Oh yeah.
um, he did a record with
He's a,
um, what's that big producer's name? It'll come to me. But
well,
he did another record with um, John Agnello
oh
produced this
yeah. Oh yeah.
record.
I've known him.
Yeah, so he did that, you know, and he's been touring around here and there. You know, I don't know, he opened for Dinosaur Jr. He'll open for this act or that act, and he's still out there doing it. So I
And
guess that's his side thing.
what does he call himself? Zopa? Is that
Zopa.
that's an unusual name. Very
Guess
unusual.
it means soup.
Does it? I didn't know
I
that.
think so. I think it means soup.
He's stirring the pot, right? He's stirring the
Orig-
pot of music.
Originally, they were called La Dolce Vita, but I guess they didn't want to use that anymore because of the Fellini movie. I don't know. So then they changed it to Zopa. When they put the record out, they called it Zopa. So
That's well, he's a multi-talented guy. I mean,
yeah,
he really
yeah.
is.
Michael's great. He's an amazing actor. You know,
Oh, he is. And The Sopranos will always go down as one of the greatest TV shows of the series.
but what's interesting about Michael is that if you know him personally, you know how great an actor he is because he's a really gentle guy. He's a Buddhist.
Hmm.
He's like he does these meditation classes and
Wow.
he's a vegetarian, you know. So that
Hmm.
that sociopathic character he plays is,
Yeah.
you know, whereas the character that little Steven plays, Silvio
Yeah.
Dante, little
Yeah.
Steven is that guy.
Yeah, that's funny.
He's that guy. That's not really acting.
That's
I
hysterical.
I worked for Steven. I worked for Renegade Nation
Oh, you did.
as a sound engineer for about 5 years, and Steven really is that gangstery sort of guy, you know.
He knows everything about music. He had that radio show, right?
Oh, he still has it.
Still
Yeah,
has it.
I think so. Yeah,
He's been playing with Bruce on and off, and
Underground Garage.
that's it.
Yeah, he's what we call a rockologist. You know,
He is. He is. Especially you go back to the 50s. I mean, he knows all those bands, doo-wop, you name it.
sure.
So who else have you worked with doing sound?
Well, doing sound, I don't know, almost everybody. I mean,
Hmm.
you know, that there's a long list. You know.
And this is tours you've done or just local
No,
shows?
some tours, a lot of local shows, you know. Um, I don't know, Patti Smith, Suzanne Vega, Joan Osborne, Dave Alvin,
Holy
Alejandro
smoke.
Escovedo.
Man.
I don't know. It's a long list. It's a long list. I
Eh,
did recently. Richard Barone hired me to do he did this thing called Music and Revolution at
Okay.
Carnegie Hall, which was like a history of the folk scene in Greenwich Village and how it evolved into this more psychedelic rock scene.
Hmm.
So he had some people from back then who are still around. He had Jose Feliciano, and he had Steve Katz, who was in the Blues Project, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He had a whole mess of people like that, and then he had some more current people. He had Vernon Reid, and he had David
Hmm.
Johansen. Actually, that was the last live performance that David Johansen did.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he
Oh,
did a duet with David Amram, believe it or not.
oh
I
my
forget what
gosh.
song they did, but looking back on it, it gives me chills a little bit because this was really his last performance before he died. And, I had
Yeah.
my hand on the fader, it's,
Wow. That's historic.
so that was a cool thing. So, occasionally I get to do these cool things, but, live sound is really just something I picked up that I can do for rent money, when I need
Okay.
it. I'm more interested in playing guitar and producing, and that's really the passion. That's really what I want to do. But I'm fortunate that I know how to do this other stuff, so I can, keep things going here.
Yeah. Now, I was fortunate enough to speak with Chris Spedding. Oh, what a legend.
Yeah.
He was a nice guy. It was a very abrupt interview though, and I didn't get to talk really about a lot of the punk
Chris,
stuff he did and oh
Chris
man.
doesn't like doing interviews.
No, he doesn't. You know him?
I played with him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I played with him. Let me see. There's a photo
I
here.
was very lucky to speak with him.
He was my favorite guitar player ever.
Oh,
Okay.
he's amazing.
He was
Absolutely
my
amazing.
fave. And I used to go see him, when he did live in New York for a period of time.
Right, right.
Here's
I
me and
remember that.
Chris.
Oh, there he is. Yep.
That's me when I was young and beautiful.
Oh, okay. Good old Cray. Yeah, what a
That
legend.
that's at the bottom line.
Ah,
So I loved Chris. I was a big fan, and I knew his guitar tech, Bill Moser, just from around.
hmm,
And Chris had moved to LA. When Chris lived in New York, he wasn't in the best condition when he lived in New York.
okay. Yeah, I know that because I read his book. Have you seen his book?
Yeah, yeah, they mentioned me in the book. They
Yeah, he
mentioned that
did.
show that I did with him. So he was out in LA, and I ran into this guy Bill, and I said, where's Spedding? He hasn't played here in a long time. And he said, he moved out to LA. He's drying out. He's jogging every day. He lost weight. He's getting
Mm,
healthy. He's never going to pick up the phone and book a gig for himself, but if someone
mm.
does it, he'll come.
Okay.
So he says, you're touring with Patti Rothberg. You probably know some talent buyers, and I did.
Mm,
And so I called Alan Pepper at the bottom line, and I arranged a show for him.
mm.
And Bill said, if you book a show for him, I'll set it up for you to play rhythm guitar.
Oh, wow.
So that's how I wound up playing with Chris. I booked this show for him at the bottom line. He came in from LA, and then Tony Garnier was a bassist, and Anton Fig was a drummer.
Mm,
But I'll tell you what, 3 rehearsals
mm.
and one show, I learned more about playing guitar than the whole 30 years
Oh, I'm
before that.
sure with him,
He's, he's really a guitar encyclopedia. And if you play with him, you're going to pick stuff up. And he was very sweet to me. Let me play a couple of
oh,
solos.
he did.
He
Okay,
did.
that's better yet.
He did. He's very subdued. He's very modest. You know
Oh,
how he
yeah.
is. You talk to him, and he was sitting in my when the before we did the rehearsal with the band, he came to my apartment and just sat with me in the living room to show me what he wanted me to play,
Right.
and at some point while we were doing that, he pauses and he says, I'm really sorry I have to play all the solos, but they expect it of me. And I said, "It's
That's
okay,
funny.
Chris. I'm honored just to be playing rhythm guitar.
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here. I'll play whatever you want." He says,
man.
"I tell you what, you tell me which song is your favorite song, and I'll let you play the solo on that one." So I said, "Hurt by Love."
Hmm.
So he let me play the solo on "Hurt by Love" when we did the show. Very cool.
I was very lucky to get an interview with him. It was just, I had exact questions for him. He just answered the questions and that was it. I mean, but hey, talking to a legend.
Well, it's a pity that Americans are not as hip to him.
I know. That's why I wanted to talk to him. I know. He's a,
Everybody owns records that he's played on,
right.
in addition to his solo career, his solo albums, he's been a session guy. He basically,
Yes.
when Jimmy Page joined the Yardbirds and later Led Zeppelin, Jimmy
Right.
Page was the premier session guy in London, and it became Chris,
Hmm.
right? Chris kind of, you know,
Took over.
took over.
Hmm.
And if you look on his website, there's a session list. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of all styles, from
Yeah.
progressive rock to punk rock. I mean, he's on Donovan records, Harry Nilsson
Well,
records,
that's another one I mentioned to him about.
Eno
McCartney.
records. McCartney.
Yes.
Yeah, he's on a Joan Armatrading record.
Oh, wow.
Um, you know, um, it's a really long list.
Yeah.
Of course, he made those two Jack Bruce records, Songs for Taylor and
Right.
Harmony Row, those two, which are, you know, both iconic records, right?
Yeah.
So, um, and supposedly he turned down the Rolling Stones
I
because
heard
he
that.
had Sharks at the time, and he didn't want to bail out on the
Oh,
Shark
okay.
tour.
Right. I didn't get to talk to him about the Sharks. I felt bad. I read the book and that
Yeah,
was a big part of his life. So did you do anything with David Johansen?
no,
No, okay.
just just that live show, like I said, at the Music and Revolution at Carnegie Hall.
So let's see a little bit of your studio a little bit here. Maybe we could show your board there or see
Or
what you work on.
let's see if I can move the.
Oh, there it is. Your mixing board there.
Yeah, well, that's an old DDA.
Okay.
This is um, this is a Pro Tools setup, but it's all an analog front end, so you get both. That's a beautiful old English mixing board, and then back here we've got all the
Yeah. Oh, you're out.
outboard.
Right.
We got some Neve mic pre's. We got the classic DBX. I don't know how much you can see here. I'm
Oh,
holding the
yeah. I can
thing
see
up.
that. Yep.
Um, and then there's a whole other rack of
Yeah, you got a lot of outboard equipment.
outboard gear here.
Yep. Well, you need that in a studio. Plus, you want to get if people have a certain sound they want. Uh, you need to get it for them.
Yeah, well, generally, if I work with a singer-songwriter, I kind of talk to them about what they're going for. Maybe I
Yeah,
ask them to, play me a record of something that and then I'll get them in the ballpark. So, I've done metal here, I've done indie rock, I've done some folk stuff. I've just been working with this woman called Marnie Kim, who's like a sort of like candy pop,
yeah. I
alty
listened to
candy
that
pop.
song. Yeah, it was very nice work there.
Yeah.
Very good.
So she's been getting some mileage out of that. Um, and I worked with Miss Guy from the Toilet Boys. That's something that's new that I'm just finishing
Okay.
now, and should be out soon. I don't know if you remember the Toilet Boys.
Not too much, no. Were they about?
In the 90s, they were kind of like the New York Dolls reborn in the 90s.
Really? I
Yeah,
have to check them
they
out.
were a thing for a while. The lead singer was Miss Guy, who was, very androgynous, um, and quite a personality, and still
Hmm.
is. And
Are they still
so
playing? Are they still playing around?
They'll play every now and then, like, somebody big will come to town and they'll go open for them. It's sort of like that. They'll do a show here and a show there, but they're not really a working band anymore.
Got it.
But I met Guy. I was asked to do the Max's 50th anniversary thing,
Oh,
which
okay.
was at Bowery Electric. So they had Jane County in the electric chairs, and there were a couple.
Oh, okay.
One of the electric chairs guitar players was missing, so they asked me to be the other one.
Hmm.
So I did that. They called it the Jane County All Stars,
Oh,
and
okay.
and then it turned out that Jane was having some health issues,
Hmm.
so she couldn't fly up from Georgia to do it. So they asked Guy to be Jane.
Okay.
So that's how that's how I met him. Let me see if I can find
Now,
a picture.
now are these like paying gigs that you have,
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean,
and
everything.
they pay you to do the sound, right? A lot of these groups, like the engineering, sound engineering.
Well, yeah, but not if I'm playing guitar. I mean,
Right, right.
this was a guitar gig.
Oh, okay.
This was let me try to find a picture.
What do you think about the scene in Brooklyn? There's a lot of bands happening there.
Yeah, so here's me.
Okay.
Here's me and Miss Guy doing Jane County.
Oh, that's great.
That's Jane County All Stars.
That's a nice picture there.
So that's how I met Guy, and then later he reached out to me and he said, the Jane County thing was fun. I love your playing. Do you want to do some songs together? So we wrote a bunch of tunes, and I produced all these tracks for him. Four of them are original tunes, and one is that one that I sent you, which
Right.
is Jesse Mallin's tune for that tribute album for
Yeah, I
him.
like that.
So that's coming out soon, I believe. We're waiting to hear from Diane Gentile exactly when that's coming out, but it should be coming out soon.
Are these mostly put out on CD or vinyl or just digital?
I think that one is going to be like a streaming thing or a download thing. I think they're releasing a couple of tracks at a time for that. It's all to
Okay.
raise money for Jesse's recovery. I'm sure you've
Mhm.
heard about Jesse Mallin's
Yes.
health
Oh,
crises.
it's a shame.
Yeah.
Hope he gets better.
Well, he's been improving. I mean, he's been doing shows, so he's mobile enough that he can actually get out there and perform.
Mm,
So it's you gotta hand it to him. He's a
yeah.
trooper.
So what do you have planned for coming up in 2026? You have any other projects in the works?
Yeah, well, I did. Do you remember a band called A Certain General?
Oh, of course. Yep.
Yeah, Parker Delaney.
They're still around.
Well, um, Parker approached me, and the last guitar player they had, Dave Lee, sadly left the planet a few years ago.
Right.
Um, but they had this record that they'd started that
Hmm.
never got finished, and the whole thing kind of got tabled for a while.
Right.
Um, but Parker decided that he wanted to reform the band and finish this record and put it out. So he approached me. I was friends with Dave Lee.
Okay.
And Dave Lee apparently loved my playing and said, if I ever can't do it, you should ask Freddie to do it.
Hmm.
So I finished the record. I did all these guitar tracks on the record, and the record's done. And now we're starting to rehearse the band, and we should be out touring next year. So we'll see. So that's the latest thing, I guess.
They've been around a long time. They've been 30, 40 years, right? Certain generals.
A certain general, yeah. I mean, they go back to the mid '80s, really,
Yes.
and Parker is he's kind of a Renaissance guy. He's
Hmm.
an amazing songwriter. He's a visual artist. He has some things. I know he has some things at MoMA. I think he's had some things at the Whitney.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, he's an interesting character. He's almost like a New York City version of a Nick Cave.
Oh, okay.
He's dark, he's artistic, he's a poet.
Hmm.
He's rock and roll, but he's very alty.
Hmm. Right. They were a good band. I mean, back in the day, I didn't even, that's great to hear that they're still doing music.
I'll send we shot one video for the record, which I'm in. I'll send you the link for that. You
Great.
can, if you want to show anything from it.
Absolutely. I want to show any links you send over, I'll put in the description of the interview because that's what I like to do is put links in of things you're doing. So maybe somebody out there will see it.
And then the other thing that I have that's interesting is I did a collaboration with Jonathan Spottiswoode, who
Oh,
had
okay.
that band Spottiswoode and His Enemies.
Hmm.
And Jonathan is an amazing singer, songwriter. He's got his own thing, but I've always loved him, and I kind of propositioned him about trying to co-write a couple of tunes and just put out sort of a Spottiswoode Katz single.
Hmm.
So I had some music for a couple of things, and he did the lyrics and the vocals. And one of them on the test run, anyway, everyone who's heard it so far, there's a song called Chet and Johnny.
Hmm.
And
I gave me that. Yeah.
this all happened very serendipitously. Everything with Jonathan Spottiswoode is like stream of consciousness.
Hmm.
I was in his apartment in London. Again, I had my acoustic guitar. I had some music. Here's an idea. Let's see if we can come up with something for this.
All right.
And I was sort of poking around his living room, because we were sitting there all afternoon. And I was poking through his albums, and I see this Chet Baker album.
Hmm.
And I just kind of, quip, oh, Chet Baker,
Yeah.
the Johnny Thunders of jazz, right?
Got it.
Because, these guys had a couple of things in common,
Right.
lifestyle wise, shall we
Yep.
say. So, um, I guess that stuck in his head. Next thing you know, he's got his legal pad there and he's got these lyrics for this thing called Chet and Johnny,
Hmm.
Chet Baker and Johnny Thunders. So it's like this fantasy jam in heaven, right?
Ah, okay.
We got Spottiswoode and His Enemies have a trumpet player, Kevin Court, who's a fabulous trumpet player. So
Hmm.
we brought him in to be Chet, and I did the Johnny Thunders bit.
Wow.
And there's this instrumental part in the middle where you get some Johnny Chuck Berry wailing, interspersed with this trumpet. and it's pretty cool. People really love it, you know. So it's not out yet, but everyone who's heard it really digs it. So I'm excited about that. I think when it comes out, it's going to come out next year. I think people are going to really like it.
That's the fun way of doing music when it spontaneously happens like that, when all of a sudden an idea turns into a song or you see something that's, yeah, I've heard it. You sent me over that song and it's really solid.
It's
Great,
cool, right?
great singing. I
Yeah,
mean,
he's got a great voice.
oh,
Jonathan's got a great voice,
that makes
and
it, and your playing is on there, very, very distinct. You have that really rock and roll sound, but you have some clean playing licks, which I
well,
like.
that stuff is that's a very deliberate Johnny Thunders imitation that I'm
Mm,
doing on there, you know. I mean that was designed to sound like that.
mm,
So, you know, the thing about Thunders is, you know, everybody thinks that they can do that, but it's deceptively simple. It's
mm.
not as easy to do it as you think. It because a lot of it has to do with the sound. You
I'm
know, I
sure.
mean, you know, Thunder is sure he wasn't a Jeff Beck. He didn't have that kind of technique, but Walter used to say I would pick up Johnny's guitar and play it through the same amp on the same settings, and I couldn't get it to sound like that.
Mm,
You know, there was this really kind of thick sound that he had that, and you know, everyone tries to imitate that, but I studied him a lot, you know. I mean,
mm.
when I was a kid, I would go to Max's or I'd go wherever he was playing. I would stand right in the front and just watch what he was doing. You know, he had this way of playing an E chord that, you know, no one else really kind of did that.
Mm.
All of his bar chords were like this finger and the pinky, you know,
Okay.
and he would have all the other he'd have all the other strings open and ringing. It was just these huge power chords he would play, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then all that double stop wailing that he did, you know, it's
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
true.
it's like Chuck Berry, but it's like turbo Chuck Berry, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, there's another guy people don't talk about, that should be known. I mean, one of the all-time greats as far as punk and that whole scene.
Well, they're talking about him a lot more now. It's a pity he's not
Yeah.
alive now because there's so much on the internet about him now,
Right.
you know,
Well,
and
that's
there's
true.
been all these reissues and there were a couple
Well,
of
that's what it
films
is.
and, you know, The Sopranos used Can't Put Your Arm Around a Memory, you know.
Mm.
Um, if he were around now, he'd be cashing in on it, you
He
know.
would be, right. That's something. Back then he wasn't, but now I think all that music is in vogue now. People want to hear this kind of stuff
Yeah,
because there's so much lousy internet music out there being manufactured that's crap. So people go back to the real playing artists that are really playing music.
yeah.
No, it's a weird time.
I think Johnny actually, even when he was alive, I think he was more successful than people realize. I mean, he did manage to make a whole bunch of records. He
Mm,
was he was touring the world until the end. I mean, you know, he was
yeah.
actually making a fair amount of money.
Okay.
I think that his lifestyle sucked up a lot of that money.
Yeah.
But you know, it's not like he was some local band passing the hat around. I mean, like those the last gigs he did before he died in Japan, I mean, those were huge gigs. I
Mm,
mean, you know, he made a shit ton of money on that. That's part of what, you know, in New Orleans, they ripped off he had all this cash, which they
mm.
stole from him, you know.
Ugh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think Bob Gruen, there was some interview with Bob Gruen. He had breakfast with Johnny the day before he left for New Orleans. He said that Johnny had like 10 grand in cash in his pocket or something, you know.
Oh boy.
I
Well,
mean, you know.
well, it's a dangerous city. You go to the outskirts of Bourbon Street, it gets pretty rough.
So he did make money, but yeah, I think now he's with the internet, he's
Yes,
definitely more widely known than he had been, you know.
right. Well,
So.
Well, I think we'll wrap this up, Freddie. I'm glad we came. I'm glad you did this. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's been an honor. Thanks for having me. And
Well, this is the second last to the last show of the year. I'm going to wrap it up for a little bit. I need to. I'm just going to take a break and see what happens next year. If I'm going to continue on, but it's been a fun journey here.
yeah, and if people want to check out anything, there's freddiekatz.com.
Okay,
And there's the website for the studio
okay.
is
And
sierrasoundnyc.com.
if anybody wants to book a session, just go to the studio site and
Sure, and they can call me or they can
okay.
email me and they can listen to tracks and all of that, you
Well,
know.
it's impressive. You got a really good sound, and you're still doing this rock and roll, which keeping it alive.
Keeping the dream alive,
You
baby.
are okay, 24/7, right? All right,
Yeah, man.
Freddie. Well, good luck to you, and maybe we'll do this again next year.
Okay, let me know when it's
Uh,
coming on.
okay, take care. Yeah, I will.
All
Take
right.
care.